one of my favorite parts of my job, and that is to collect people's stories, because storytelling is important, and that is at the heart of the comic book medium.
This Organized Chaos video is brought to you by Gems Art Studio. Gems Art Studio is an online store that allows access to prints that you can use for most anything, obviously as just a picture, or as a wallpaper, or as a bookmark, or anything you can think of. You can find Gems Art Studio at etsy.com/shop/Gems Art Studio. This video is also brought to you by viewers like you. Thank you.
Jamie Stewart.
Hi, Jamie. I'm Joe Setlock. This is Bob of Organized Chaos.
Nice to meet you.
And this is the rest of the family.
Great.
Have you always been into comic books?
I've been reading comic books since I was 5 years old.
5 years old? Is that how you learned to read, or did that help you get
interested? It
interest?
definitely helped. I was a good reader. I used to watch the Electric Company on PBS.
Oh, wow.
And Electric Company at that time had an agreement with Marvel Comics Book Group to produce Spider-Man vignettes.
Really? I
Electric
didn't know
Company.
that.
And I was such a big fan of that I wanted my mom to go buy me Spider-Man comic books.
Oh, I should be
And so I started reading when I was at the age of 5, and certainly helped me become a much more better reader, a proficient reader at an early age.
What have you learned from comics?
Comic books are a great escape for the natural stresses of life. The heroic adventures of spandex-clad warriors. I'll get it out. The adventures of being able to escape beyond and dream, to have powers, to fly, to have super strength, super speed. Fuels kids' imagination, and that power of creativity, the power of imagination, oftentimes lies at the heart of these stories of the hero's journey. And so it's kind of a natural, complementary thing to, I think, childhood development.
Did it help you get through the dark points in your life?
They were always a source of comfort, I guess, as well as pleasure and enjoyment. I've had a love affair on and off with comics throughout my life. As I grew older, I kind of grew by the wayside and began to pursue interest in sports cards and sports in general. I wanted to be a news journalist or a sports journalist. And then entered the ministry, where I've been in full-time ministry since 1988. And so this is a nice side hustle for me on the vendor side of things. So it's amazing to see how the pop culture universe has expanded over the last 2 decades, especially because the Marvel and DC superheroes are Western civilization's contribution to the great pieces of literature and icons of world literature. Greek mythology, Roman mythology have all made their contribution. This is Western civilization's contribution. Everybody now knows who Iron Man is. Black Widow, the Hulk. These are all easily recognizable by people who didn't grow up reading comic books, because they've crossed that border into mainstream media now. So it's pretty amazing if you followed the journey and been part of it since your childhood.
As a minister, have you had any kind of second thoughts with like the comic code issues that came up when you were very young?
Yeah, when I was young, by today's standards, the art and the storylines were pretty tame. I am not one for censorship. I'm one for common sense and personal conviction. So, Tolkien and C.S. Lewis used much fantasy imagery, wizardry, magic, those kind of things. Certainly I have no issues with that kind of stuff. When you get into the nudity and things of that nature, there is that niche of collecting for people who like that kind of stuff. That's something I tend to shy away from. But you know, the Comics Code of Authority served a purpose, but it by today's standards is very, very much looser.
Yeah.
Than it
I'm
was
sure
in the
it's
60s
changed.
and 70s. Yeah.
Or when I was young in the 50s
Right.
and 60s.
Right. I've got a couple on the top row of my wall, some horror and sci-fi stuff from the late 50s, which you can see the size of the Comics Code. You can see the size of the Comics Code of Authority has changed. And Frank Miller, who wrote Daredevil,
Sure.
he introduced a whole ton of dark violence to the title in the early 80s to the character Daredevil. Much more violent than, you know, a lot of comics from this era, but you can see.
Wow, yeah.
And this is from
Amazing.
1981, so it's kind of interesting to see
Wow.
the change evolve.
Well, that's amazing. So do you think you'll keep reading comics, keep being into comics for the rest of your life?
I am not a huge fan of current comics, number one, because there are not nearly as many words in comics these days, like the prose of the Bronze Age, 1970s that I grew up in. Matter of fact, if you take a current comic book now, compare it to Spidey Super Stories from the Electric Company partnership that I started reading in 1975. Haven't done a statistical analysis of it, but I would say that probably they have about the same amount of words in it, which I think is a tragedy. It's become much more of a visual medium than a reading medium.
So are you a fan of the
And
classics?
so I am not a fan at all, really, of most modern stories, even though the storytelling is much more developed and the art is very chic and attractive. So I'm pretty much a middle-aged fart at the age of 51, stuck with the 1960s to 1980s stuff that I grew up reading. But I encourage people, read what you like. I encourage kids to go to their local library. Libraries are a great resource for free to check out graphic novels, which are comic books contained in one volume, so they get an idea of what they like, and they don't have to spend any money for it.
Anything you want to plug? Anything you want to talk about? Obviously, your company.
I've been on the vendor side of business as a side hustle since 2006. I work in hospice as a full-time chaplain, working with the terminally ill. And so one of my favorite parts of my job, and that is to collect people's stories, because storytelling is important, and that is at the heart of the comic book medium. And I love good stories. And so this is a nice complement to the work that I do Monday through Friday. It's a nice counterbalance. So I'm located in Northeast Ohio and continue to do 20 to 25 shows a year. And it's great to be here in the Queen City.
You have a website?
Facebook page.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So just Facebook, Phat Daddy Comics?
Yep.
All right. Awesome.
They think order and chaos are somehow opposites and try to control what won't.
I used to fuck guys like you in prison.